Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's belated live stream. Obviously, live stream is normally Tuesday. I was all set to do the live stream last night on my car ran out of petrol when I was away, so I couldn't get back in time to do it. You have that thing in the car that tells you how many miles are left. The reading was miles out, so I ended up stranded and couldn't get back in time. But I got everything prepared for the live stream, so I thought, why not do it tonight instead? So here we are, as ever. There's plenty to talk about. So we'll start off, obviously, wishing everyone a happy new year. A big year for the Scottish Family Party. It's Scottish election year. This is the time when the Family Party gets the most attention. It's the most biggest opportunity for us in the election cycle. Because in UK elections, a Scottish party doesn't get that much attention. In Scottish elections, where we really do get a substantial amount of attention from the media and just from the electorate in general. So it's a very important year for us. You'll be hearing more about our campaign in the weeks to come. We're going to have a series of events around Scotland in January. We'll be publicising those very soon. So it's not campaign launch, but it's just we're introducing people. We'll be explaining about what some of the things we've got planned. So we're thinking about what's our party election broadcast going to be like, our election leaflets, what we're going to put on them, what themes are we going to emphasise, how bold are we going to be, how challenging, how controversial or otherwise will we be. So we're thinking about all of those things at the moment. So lots and lots going on. Candidates, we've basically got candidates. We're at quite an advanced stage with that. The lead candidate in each region is already set, and we've got a long list of people who are willing to be list candidates as well. So we'll easily have our 30 or 40 candidates that we want to have. If you'd like to volunteer for that, do get in touch. Email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org, and you could maybe play a part helping us in that way as well. So it's a big year, but so lots of things to hear about as time goes on. But that's a little way in the future. Maybe by next week we'll be publicising our events through January. Right, world events. Lots of things going on the world stage. Probably worth giving those a mention. Venezuela. What's going on there? What's my take on that? My take is that America's actions could be perfectly justified, depending on what comes next. If their intention is to remove the bad person and then enable a democratically elected government to function at the earliest possible opportunity, then if that's the way things are going to go, then that's all well and good. If things head in the direction of, well, we just want an American puppet and we want whoever's going to give us the best deal on the oil or whatever, well, that's not so good. So if it's heading towards, let's say, a democratically elected government at the earliest opportunity, then I think America's action is justified. Is it going to lead to that? I think it's unclear at the moment. So we have to wait and see what's happening. Trump's been talking about the oil. Now, it is a fact that American oil companies have invested a lot in Venezuela, and basically their infrastructure facilities were basically taken by the Venezuelan government when they nationalized it. So there is an injustice to correct there. But on the other hand, let's see how that goes forward. If America's thinking, well, actually, we can use this as an opportunity basically to make money out of Venezuelan oil by rigging the market and whatever, or ensuring that they have to be dealing through us, then that could be a problem. So as far as I'm concerned, the jury's out. They haven't done the wrong things so far, but we need to see what comes next. Greenland has been a lot in the news recently. My view with Greenland is this. Let's just bring this on. Right, good evening. Sounds a bit hoarse. I am indeed, yeah. I'm at the tail end of a cold I've had sort of over Christmas. It's on its way, slowly. It's going away. So Greenland, I think Greenland will be an interesting test case because quite a few people just detest Donald Trump, and quite a few people are pretty devoted to him. I would say devoted to him in a way that's not necessary for a politician in a different country. Now, if you're campaigning for a political party, let's say you're campaigning for the SNP, then you have to be portraying and defending John Swinney, portray him in a positive light, and be a sort of John Swinney supporter, because that's part of supporting the SNP. Like the family party, if you wanted to put the family party, then you wouldn't be talking positively about me. And if you think I've said something wrong or done something wrong, you maybe want to be downplaying that because you're loyal to that party. But when it comes to politicians in other countries, they shouldn't really have that effect. It's not necessary to show loyalty to politicians or leaders in other countries. It's not, you haven't got a loyalty there or shouldn't have. And I worry that some people in Scotland and the UK are very, very committed to Donald Trump. Now, I would say I'm sort of middle of the road with Donald Trump. Sometimes I'm quite positive, quite like what he does. Other times I'm concerned about what he does. But the key thing for each of us should be that you judge each issue on what's right and wrong, not on who you like and don't like. So it may be for some people you've decided you like Donald Trump, and let's say, I'm not saying this is likely to happen, but it's not impossible. Let's say they basically invade Greenland. Okay. Now, I think that the challenge to everyone is not to respond to that. Oh, I like Donald Trump, so I'm going to be okay with that. Surely that's something that will be indefensible, and even the most ardent Donald Trump supporter should be saying, whoa, this is way off. This cannot happen. Now, of course, when one country invades another, they never just say, yeah, we're just a greedy country. Might is right. We're more powerful. We've got a bigger army, so we're going to steal your country off you. No one ever says that. They always say, oh, well, historically, it's a bit ambiguous who it belongs to. We need the country for some particular reason, etc., etc. The people in this country, they're really part of our country, really. They shouldn't really be a separate country. That's the sort of lines people take to justify, to use as pretext for basically stealing land off other countries. So the fact that America is even talking in this way, I think, is absolutely appalling. It's quite shocking. And it's quite sad as well, because the Republican Party in America is very heavily influenced by Christians. I mean, Donald Trump isn't a Christian. I'm not sure he claims to be a Christian even. But a lot of people in the senior representatives in the Republican Party are Christians of various types, and they're very open about their faith. And I think it will be very unfortunate indeed, to say the least, if this government comprised of people who are known very much as being Christians go and invade the country next door. That will not be a positive reflection on the Christian faith. And again, I think for everyone, we've got to look at every issue as what's right and wrong, not to do with tribal loyalties, whose side we're on, who we like, their other policies or whatever. Or you've got to look at each issue right and wrong. And invading the country next to you is a big deal. Even, I would say, even the fact that they're allowing these threats to be emanating from them without correcting them, that is a big deal as well. If you imagine you're living in a nation and a more powerful country next to you is basically making noises as though we might invade you. We're thinking about it. We'll see how it goes. That in itself, even without actually doing it, that in itself is totally wrong. Very, very seriously wrong, to put people in a fear that that's what you're going to do. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. I mean, if America wants Greenland, they're going about it in completely the wrong way. They should be trying to make friends, basically. I mean, this argument that they need it for defense purposes, that's nonsense. America can put whatever defense infrastructure in Greenland it likes. There's no barrier to that as well. It's a fellow NATO member. But if they want to get Greenland, I mean, they should offer to buy it. Say to the people of Greenland, I mean, 58,000 of them, offer them $1 million each, $5 million each. Say, right, if you will all vote to become part of America, this is what we'll give you. Now, you may say that's pretty, mercenary way to approach things, but I don't know. I mean, can a country try that if they want to? I don't know. Or negotiate with Denmark and see what's a possibility. But those things are more likely to succeed. Surely, particularly if we're trying to persuade the people of Greenland, surely they're more likely to succeed after a sort of hearts and minds campaign. You've been trying to charm them and say how welcome they'd be and how much you feel, how well they'd fit in with America, etc. But the way it's going has been completely the opposite. Alarmed relative of Trump's desire for Greenland that he captured Maduro. When he captured Maduro, I thought, right, that's a pretty extreme thing to do. So I need to look at it, and the justification needs to match up to the action. And I feel it does. But the important thing is going to be what happens next with it. With Greenland, I think there's no justification at all. So it could be a very difficult situation, and it will be an embarrassment to, if you like, Christian influence in politics, social conservatism in politics. Could Trump and the Republican Party, they're the figureheads of that movement, rightly or wrongly, they're the figureheads of that sort of movement. And if they're going to invade Greenland, well, I say that's a major, major embarrassment. Anyway, closer to home, let's see what's been happening. The SNP have engaged in the most shameless populism by declaring holiday days, well, one to start off with, for the World Cup. So to celebrate Scotland's first men's World Cup match in nearly 30 years, they're going to have a bank holiday. Now, if I'm understanding this rightly, the bank holiday will be on a Monday and the game will be on a Sunday, I think a Sunday evening. So they're sort of implying, in some of the things I've seen the same, it sounds like they're implying everyone's going to get so drunk on Sunday night that having a day off will be great. They'll need the next day off. I mean, really? Is that really the moral tone you want to set for the nation? Look at the top there. Believe in Scotland. The SNP are always trying to equate themselves with Scotland, identify themselves as Scotland, as though voting for the SNP because they stand up for Scotland and you support the Scotland team because they're Scotland. So they're trying to merge themselves with Scottish identity and Scottish sporting success and support as well. So I really think this is, it's the most cynical populism from the SNP. I mean, if it was so people could watch the game, I still wouldn't agree with that, really. It's businesses are going to bear the cost for this. So it's all very well for the government to say, oh, look how nice we are. Then businesses have to deal with the problems. They've got enough problems on their plate with the Labour government in Westminster and the SNP in charge in Scotland without having to give staff days off. So not impressed by that, say, especially since it's not even the day of the game that they're talking about. But they want this building up to the election campaign. By the time the election comes, World Cup fever, well, it'll be starting to pick up. I think the games are not until June. So there's a bit of a gap. But then the SNP will be hoping that by the time of the election, this will really hit home with people. It's the SNP government that gave you a day off because of the football. The Greens proposed this, of course, and the SNP are following on. I used to always say that was the pattern with Scottish politics. Whatever the Greens are saying now, the SNP will be saying in 1 or 2 years' time, and Labour and the Lib Dems, and the Conservatives will be saying in 5 years' time. But I think maybe that's changed a little bit. The Greens and the SNP have diverged a little, but let's see how it goes after the next election. They might end up in coalition. Yeah, when they win the World Cup, yeah, it's an election gimmick. Absolutely, absolutely agree, Alistair. Spot on. Right, what else is going on? This is interesting. This is from the Herald social media. 1,600 newborn babies born dependent on drugs in Scotland since 2017. Difficult to imagine a worse start in life. Well, we could talk about various things that are impediments at the start of life, but certainly babies being born dependent on drugs is absolutely appalling. Terrible situation, very sad. And again, this gives the lie to the line that, well, illegal drug use, well, it's sort of pretty cool and some people choose to do it, but we just need to help them to try and reduce the harms of it. And then it'll all be fine. Stigma's the real issue. Stigma's that what we really need to focus on centrally. But basically, people are free to do what they want, and we can be pretty chilled and cool about it. That's the SNP's sort of line to illegal drug abuse. But this yet again brings it home that a person's choice to use illegal drugs doesn't just affect them, it affects other people and affects other people without their consent. And pre-born children, I mean, if anyone can't consent to anything, then it's them, isn't it? So yet again, how can these sort of liberal progressive types with drug misuse persist with this line that the real issue is stigma? The real issue is stigma. It's not. It's people making bad decisions that harm themselves and, in a sense, more importantly, the harm other people. We heard a lot about the drug deaths in Scotland. I'm going to come on to them later on in the show as well. But that's another one of the many effects that they have. Right, I guess. So a cup of tea. Now, tonight, I've got a whole lot of statistics to show you. A lot of them are from the Spectator Data Hub or whatever it's called, but some are from other places as well. But there's a lot of information I'm going to go through, and it'll help to build up a picture of some of the things that are going on in Scotland. This first one, it's not from Scotland, it's from America, but it is very interesting. So the graph here is about total fertility rate. So total fertility rates, as you know, are collapsing worldwide. Basically, the worldwide nations are not having enough children to sustain their own populations. In some cases, they're facing a catastrophic population collapse. I mean, among the places facing that really is Scotland. A very serious problem brewing there. But what this graph's shown is that between 1960 and 1980, the reason for the reduction in the total fertility rate was couples having less children. So it was mainly, if you look at the darker blue section, that's the decline due to couples having fewer children. And then the paler bit, the smaller bit, it's to do with there being fewer couples, people remaining single. Whereas if we look at the situation, the decline since 2000 up to 2022, the vast majority of the decline is to do with fewer couples. So it's not so much to do with couples having less children, fewer children. It's more to do with fewer people becoming couples, if you like. Now, why is that? One reason I think would be the rise in sort of LGBT ethos in society. By couples, as you know, this mean heterosexual couples. But I think in general, there's a drift away from valuing, well, marriage, for a start, marriage and family life as being a noble end and a desirable route through life. That culture has been eroded, and that's more of the factor there. So that's fascinating, because I think often when governments look at this, they look at how to encourage couples to have more children, or to have as many children as they would like to have, rather than encouraging couples to form. I think so there's a policy area there that I haven't heard of any policies designed to encourage couples to form. I guess the Family Party's policy of promoting marriage and the value of family life would be seeking to address that area. So yeah, right. So let's have a look. What else have we got? This is from the Daily Telegraph. I put one of these up occasionally. I mean, the Daily Telegraph, probably the biggest conservative, right-leaning newspaper in the UK. And even in the Telegraph, you get a routine drip, drip, drip of this sort of stories. You know, my wife and I date other people. It's nice having friends who you can sleep with. You know, this sort of thing. Just the sort of Channel 4 type stories. Anything and everything apart from mum and dad bringing up their own kids. And the reason they put it in the Telegraph, I don't think it's because it represents their values. I don't think the editor of the Telegraph thinks, oh yeah, this is the sort of thing we want to be promoting, so let's have another story about this. And that's what the BBC thinks. The BBC really does think anything and everything apart from mum and dad bringing up their own kids, we want to encourage it. So the Telegraph doesn't think that, but they must know that people click on it and read it. There's an appetite for it in society. And this sort of continual stream of stories, well, glorifying, maybe not, promoting, presenting in a positive light, this sort of thing, deviation from committed, stable marriage is a big problem in our society. It would be great to see this trend turned around, and for this sort of story to be replaced with stories of, you know, we had a really difficult patch, but we patched things up and we got through, and now we're much happier together, which is generally the story of marriages in difficulty. By the way, things generally do improve and things get sorted out to a significant degree. Yeah, but even the Telegraph are publishing this sort of thing. Now let's nip over to the BBC. How the postcode lottery of parenting really impacts young children. Now, of course, the biggest impact on young children, well, we heard about being born addicted to drugs. That's obviously not great at all. But a massive factor on the life chances of children is the family structure into which they are born. If they're born into a family home with a married mother and father, then they've got two-parent privilege, and they are most likely to continue to enjoy two-parent privilege throughout their upbringing and later life as well. So that's the main thing. That's the main factor. But the BBC obviously are not going to be too keen on that, are they? They're going to want to focus on anything and anything apart from that, particularly things that involve the government spending money. That tends to be the sort of left-wing perspective. Right, so let's have a look at what the BBC have got to say about this postcode lottery. Right, some of it's not postcode actually, but anyway, so they're saying inequalities, if you like, that children face. So they're saying there's generous employers and statutory maternity pay. So they're basically saying different employers offer different sort of deals for working parents. And they're saying they're not saying it's an injustice directly, but they're saying it's an inequality. So implied is probably some sort of problem. But again, you see where they're focusing. They're focusing on basically parents who've got jobs, because maternity pay is not for mums. It's for mums who just had a job. It's for mums who had a job and then took time off to become a mum. A mum who's had one kid, a couple of years later has another one, a couple of years later has another one, a couple of years later has another one, but doesn't work in between, then they don't get maternity pay somehow or other. They're not a mum somehow. Then they're not the right sort of mum. The right sort of mum that the government pays is the sort that's just been working until they decide to have the child. So some employers offer more generous benefits than others. So they're saying this is an injustice. The real injustice is that the government only pays mums who just had a job. Mums who've been full-time mums for a significant number of years, which in a sense, if you want to be having more children around, these are maybe the most important sort of mums to the state, well, they get nothing. So they're looking at that alleged injustice. Right, what else have they got? Shared parental leave. Now, basically, progressive left-wing governments all over the place, they want to make men and women the same. So they don't want to have the mum taking maternity leave for a year or whatever while the man keeps working. They want to do everything they can to equalize things because they think maternity leave harms women's careers, and it's just not fair, etc. Whereas actually what couples want when they're given the choice is usually they want mum to be at home with the young kids and dad working. That's what they want. So governments are trying to push parents towards a more equal division of work and childcare, but the families don't want it. And so the BBC is obviously not happy with that. Low uptake of shared parental leave. This is some sort of problem to solve. Childcare postcode lottery. Now again, all the parties in the Scottish Parliament, and the Conservatives included, well, we're reform on this. I guess reform are probably about the same. The thing is, reformers, you don't know where they stand. I mean, in Scotland, they've published about 5 sentences of policies. So I guess they'd be with the Conservatives on this sort of issue. But the assumption is, again, from the BBC type line, is that what every parent wants is for the government to take the kids off in the earliest possible stage and to provide as much childcare as possible, or if it's private, for it to be as cheap as possible. So the emphasis on other people looking after the kids apart from mum and dad. So that's emphasis there. Whereas actually the evidence is, to be honest, I mean, being with mum for the first early years is best. That's what the evidence indicates, but they're not so keen on stating that. But let's see what we get to here. Brain development and early socialization. So she says, during the first few years of a child's life, the learning capacity of the infant's brain far outstrips an adult's brain. Okay. I heard something once that apparently during your first 18 years of life, you learn an average, I think it's maybe 3 words a day. 3 words every day in the first 18 years of your life. Now, you may think that just sounds totally unbelievable, but if that's just based on the number of words you know, an average person knows when they're 18 and how many days they've had to learn them. So they must have been learning words at a rate of like 2 or 3 words a day, which is quite amazing, isn't it? I mean, do you remember a day when you learned more than 1 new word? Well, there must have been an awful lot of them because you know a lot of words. Right, early socialization is particularly important. What babies need and what they learn from the best are simple, slow, repetitious, face-to-face interactions. Right, that sounds pretty one-on-one, doesn't it? Some experts think that the more support parents get, either from the state or from their employer, the better their baby's brain develops. Really? Well, it depends what that help provides. If that help enables the parent to go off to work and leave the baby in a nursery somewhere, I cannot see how that possibly happens. If it means enabling the parents to be with the baby for longer, then I can see exactly how that happens. And our policies are geared towards helping parents who want to make the choice to be with their own kids, because it is so vital at this stage. Right, so Professor Pascal argues that the child crucially needs during the early years is interaction both from adults and other children. High quality nursery can be the ideal environment for this. If you want this face-to-face interaction with adults, no. Mum and dad are the ideal environment for that, one-to-one attention. Now, nursery, okay, and I think nursery, when they get to 2, 3, 4, whatever, it's very positive, learning to get on with other kids, even though at the youngest ages, they do tend to just ignore each other and do their own thing. But never assume. The assumption tends to be, if the state's not providing it, then it's not happening. I mean, what do they think families are doing in these early years? Do you think the mums are just sort of all sitting at home with their own kids? No, they meet up with other mums, with other families, and the kids play with each other. I mean, these things happen naturally, whether the state provides them or not. And the next one, long-term impact of nursery on a child's development is more complicated. Before a child turns 2, he says, they need a stable caregiver they could interact with. Okay, I'm surprised this got through past the BBC editor. So Professor Jones says they need a stable caregiver, normally known as mum, I think. Mum and dad, they're a lot, but generally, traditionally, naturally, I would suggest that'd be mum in these early years, being this stable caregiver. So do you see how reluctant they are to state it straight out? That really the ideal is mum with the kids. They don't want to say that, but he does accept what the research shows. They can get that at nursery, but they can also find it at home. A stable caregiver at nursery, really, for just a few hours a day, with a number of staff who are maybe changing, etc. I really don't think so, Professor Jones. That sounds to me like Professor Jones knows exactly the truth, but he really doesn't want to say it. I mean, you've got to always claim that nursery is just the best possible start for children. It's just ideal in every possible way. You can't criticize nursery, but you can see, reading between the lines, what he really thinks. It's after a child is 2 that nursery becomes actively beneficial. I can believe that, but it doesn't need to be nursery. It could just be playing with other kids. At this point, they start to interact with their peers, understand who other children are, and that's really important, right? I absolutely agree with that. So interesting there. And again, the other parties will not address that. They always address this issue from the point of view of what can they offer to parents in terms of someone else looking after their kids for them. Whereas our approach is completely different. Right, let's just move on from that. Do share this if you can. Right, this is from a while ago. I said that this was before Christmas, but I didn't talk about it before then. So Adnan Hussein MP, he's one of these like Muslim pro-Palestine MPs, which is a trend I think is wholly negative. We do not want sectarian politics in Scotland. We don't want people voting on the basis of religious faith. We don't want them voting on the basis of allegiance in foreign conflicts, allegiance to foreign nations either. We want people voting on the basis of policy. But it's interesting what it says here. It says, if you appeal to the goodness of a nation by asking to be granted safety on its shores and then proceed to commit an act as foul and monstrous as this one. He's talking about someone, an asylum seeker, refugee, or whatever, who's committed a sexual assault. Then all goodness must be removed. They are owed nothing. So saying they should just be deported. And I just thought that was interesting, isn't it? Because I think on this discussion, often the thought is that there's the sort of hard right of politics will be saying, right, deport them. If people commit a crime, deport them. And I've got a lot of sympathy for that view. If you're talking about new arrivals or people who are not citizens, then, absolutely, that's a good thing. But then it's normally seen that the other side of the argument is the sort of left-wingers and Muslims. They're very much pro-asylum seekers, pro-immigration, which generally Muslims are. But it's interesting to see this. It's not straightforward as it's sometimes seen, because this is a Muslim here taking a very hard line. I would say, as you'd expect from a Muslim. I mean, Islam is not exactly soft on crime, is it? But taking a very hard line and saying, criminals, foreign criminals should be deported. So it looks interesting. So there's it's more nuanced discussion than sometimes we are thinking. Let's have a look at some of the comments here. Right, how about this? Being a high school teacher, the majority of pupils who go on to do childcare at college aren't the ones I'd want to look after my own children. I think that's a very interesting point, because you can do that at age 16, can't you? And I would say, I mean, looking after children of any age, I mean, my personal view is it's not necessarily something you need professional qualifications for, but it's something where you really do need the right attitude and a bit of common sense and wisdom. So yeah, I'm sure gaining the qualifications is of some value, things that they learn. But the main thing is you've got to have the right sort of person with the right attitude. If you've got someone who's just a bit, lazy, can't be bothered, too busy scrolling through on the phone or whatever, then yeah, that is far from ideal. So when they're talking about nursery being superior, I think a lot of nursery staff, I'm sure, are excellent, but also there'll be some who well, it's not quite the vocation that it might be with them, because they're so desperate to get people to do it. The Scottish government doubled the amount of childcare available for 3 and 4 year olds, then has had a massive problem trying to recruit people to actually do it, which always reminds me of G.K. Chesterton's thing about the idea that you're in the garden and it's raining, so you hold up an umbrella to keep the rain off the flowers, but then stand there with a watering can or watering them artificially. So it's like saying we don't want parents to be bringing the kids up. We're going to recruit state agents to do it instead, and they found it's actually pretty difficult to do that. So that is a struggle. Right, no sectarianism in Scotland. I'm not entirely sure of the context for that comment. I think the Muslim pro-Palestine sectarian voting, that's one thing. I mean, obviously there is sectarianism in Scotland, unfortunately. I mean, I would like to think it's fading away, but then at other times you think, wow, this is alive and well. But yeah. This is interesting. This is from the Daily Mail. And it's talking about LGBT Youth Scotland, the campaigning charity that's been hammered with a series of scandals. It's not just that one of their CEO was sent to prison for sexually abusing a baby. There have been a series of other issues as well, where members of their staff have behaved inappropriately, etc. I won't bother going through and listing them, but they're still receiving substantial sums of public money. Now, part of the issue with them, obviously, is they've been at the forefront of promoting transgender ideology to children, which is totally wrong. And the Daily Mail comes at it from the transgender and the scandal point of view. I think it's interesting with these. With LGBT Scotland, another issue for me is the LGB thing. They're promoting to children and young people a lifestyle, a philosophy, a moral system that I think is wrong and is not going to be good for them. So when a young person phones up the LGBT Youth Scotland helpline and says, oh, I think I might be gay, you can imagine what the answer is going to be. I mean, you hope the answer is not going to be, okay, let's get in touch. Let's meet at the park bench and have a talk about it, and we can explore your sexuality, because there's things not too dissimilar to that have happened with this organization. But what sort of response are they going to get? They're going to get a very encouraging response. Oh, that's great. That's really fantastic. We're going to support you and help you down this road. But it's not a road that tends to lead to positive outcomes. So I think we've got a situation in Britain now, whereas LGB things, a lot of people, particularly the right-wing conservative people, they really don't like it. You get this from Reform sometimes. They certainly don't like it. And they'll attack things related to it, but they don't want to actually criticize the core concept, because they think that's sort of not allowed anymore. So in Reform, is he there? I can't remember his role now. David Bull, is that his name? Very prominent in Reform. He's a bit of a gay rights activist. I mean, Thomas Kerr in Reform in Glasgow, prominent figure. He's, well, at least in the past, has been quite a gay rights activist. So they're same as this article, the sort of discomfort they're showing, the disapproval they're showing. They obviously want to have a go at LGBT Youth Scotland, but they won't go for the central issue, which is the ideology, the philosophy, the moral system the LGBT Youth Scotland are promoting to young people, because it's wrong. They're promoting things that are morally wrong and are harmful. Those two things always go together. And so that's the core issue. So the Family Party will get to the heart of that issue. I would compare that and say, it's like if you had an organization where kids could phone up and say, I'm thinking about smoking. And they said, oh, well, that's great. We'll help you to get your first packet of cigarettes and get you started. What do you want? Do you want to smoke a pipe, cigar, cigarettes? What do you fancy? You tell us about it, and we'll support you on this journey. And if anyone disagrees with this, well, we'll help you to stand up for them and reject their viewpoints. So it certainly is not acting in the interests of children and young people. And we're prepared to actually get to the heart of the matter and explain why that is. Right, our friends, the Green Party. I mean, Gillian Mackay, co-leader of the Green Party, she is, I would say, a sort of abortion fanatic. It's maybe more or less at the top of her agenda, partly because I think she sees it as an easy issue, that you can push something forward, everyone will agree with you, the media will fall over themselves to give you interviews and column inches, and the whole parliament more or less will vote for whatever you propose. I mean, so it's an open goal, really, for Gillian Mackay. But she's at it again, and she's objecting to anti-abortion group being allowed in schools. Now, these are groups from SPUC, Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, who have speakers and drama groups, whatever, that do go into schools, I would guess particularly Catholic schools. So what Gillian Mackay is saying is she's outraged the Catholic schools are bringing in people to speak to the pupils about Catholic teaching. That's what she's saying. Now, the Greens say they're not opposed to Catholic schools. They're perfectly happy with Catholic schools. Have as many Catholic schools as you like, as long as they don't actually allow the pupils to hear Catholic teaching, because obviously that's an outrage. That's the offer from the Scottish Greens. But can you see this? It's like spoiling for a fight. Anything she could find remotely pro-life, they'll go after it and suggest it should be banned. And that's included in the past crisis pregnancy centres as well, which brings us on to the other point. Tech giant faces questions after report on free pro-life advertising. Now, this report was in the National, so I read it. Basically, I think people like Google, for example, if you're a non-profit organization, then you can go to them and ask, you can apply for some free advertising, and Google will do that. Okay, fair enough. And it seems like some pro-life groups have applied for this free advertising, as they've got every right to do as a non-profit organization. And so they've been getting ads coming up on Google. Obviously, some pro-abortion people have seen that and thought, well, anything that's pro-life is inherently terrible and shouldn't be allowed, and whoever's facilitating this should be named and shamed. So they've said, this is terrible, this is allowed to happen. Gillian Mackay's jumped on it as well. Now, the sort of things these adverts were, it was saying basically, they're trying to get to women who are pregnant, who might be considering an abortion, in order to offer support, an ultrasound scan, etc. Yes, with the goal of helping them to at least present the possibility that they can actually have their child rather than abortion. But Gillian Mackay thinks this is so terrible that, again, something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. Anti-abortion is actually pro-life. Interesting framing. Yes, absolutely. Now, as you will probably know, the BBC's editorial guidelines do not allow their journalists to use the term pro-life. It's a banned term. That's how institutionally biased the BBC are. So, right. Now, this is an interesting point. Speaking as a high school teacher, a few years ago, we had many emails saying pupil X wants to be known as Y, changing gender. In the past year, I don't think we've had any. Fascinating. That is the worldwide trend, it seems to me. I've got some statistics later on. I can't remember from the UK or from America. I'll get to them. But the trend is that transgenderism has gone out of fashion. Basically, it had a real peak a couple of years ago, but now the rates just collapsed. I mean, how can that be explained? Now, the people who said that the increase was to do with people feeling more able to be open about it, So there's always been the same number of transgender people. It's just before they couldn't say, but now more of them can say. So there's been this massive spike in the number of people. But now it's gone back down again. So I assume these same people will now have to say, well, that's because society has become very hostile to transgender people. Now, in a sense, you can never refute that argument, because transgender ideology, to some degree, let's not exaggerate. I mean, it's the official policy of the Scottish education system and the Scottish government and countless organisations in Scotland. So let's not get carried away. But there has been some turning against the ideology among the general public and among some institutions, maybe businesses as well. So that has happened. And that has resulted in fewer children, in particularly, saying that they think they're transgender. Now, that's going to happen because they're influenced by these fashions. But of course, the people on the other side can always say that what I would say is like it's going out of fashion. They would say it's become a hostile environment. So these poor transgender children are just having to suffer in silence rather than being open and free about who they really are. So it's a tricky one because the evidence fits both theories, if you like. But it's encouraging that it is in retreat. That certainly seems to be the case. Right, this is an interesting one. Pam Duncan Glancy, the Labour MSP, I think she got elected at the last election. Maybe it was the one before, I'm not sure. But it came out recently that she got a friendship with someone who'd been convicted of a child sex offence. I think it was possession of child pornography or something. Now, they just say friendship. I'm reading between the lines and imagining that this is a bit more than a friendship. So it's more a more intimate relationship. I don't know, but it seems like that might be the case. But expecting MSP to quit because they had a friendship with a sex offender. I really find this a tricky issue. When she stood down from her shadow cabinet position in the Labour Party, I thought, is that really necessary? That people were calling for her to stand down. I think there's quite a grey area. But should you have to stand down because of your friend? So if you're a politician, if your friend does something really bad, do you have to unfriend them, disassociate yourself from them? And I would suggest probably not. I mean, if the person is, reformed, repentant or whatever, then surely as a friend, you'd want to walk with them through that process. So I'm not sure about this whole business. Now, if it is that basically that, this is a romantic relationship, then, I mean, would you expect someone to, let's say you've got a married MSP. Okay, the woman's an MSP, she's married, and her husband is convicted of a sex crime. I mean, does that MSP have to resign or get divorced if she's going to stay as an MSP? I'm not at all sure about this. So I think maybe there's more to this story than meets the eye, but I'm finding it quite perplexing. And it's making me think about exactly what's going on there. Yeah. When you think about Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, should Nicola Sturgeon have resigned? Because her husband was obviously up to all sorts of financial irregularities, shall we say. That's an interesting question, interesting issue. Right, the European Union, I don't give that much of a mention, really, because we're not in it anymore. But the European Parliament has voted in favour of a fund that will provide abortions for citizens of states where abortion basically isn't allowed, which are places like Malta, Poland is quite restrictive, maybe some of the Eastern European countries. So the European Parliament is basically trying to go over the head of the nations and saying, if a nation bans abortion, don't worry, women in that nation will provide an abortion for you over the border, which in many cases will be, jump on a train and go for a few hours and you'll be able to get an abortion somewhere else, which I think shows, again, a pretty dogmatic commitment to abortion within the EU. It's almost a bit like the opposite of overturning Roe versus Wade. It's a bit like the EU saying, we're deciding abortion actually will be available to everyone in every nation in the EU. Because if you can't get it in your nation, we'll just provide it in another one. They'll pay for it. Now, you may be quite horrified by that, but of course, this is exactly what Scotland did with Northern Ireland as well. Remember, Nicola Sturgeon said basically when abortion wasn't available in Northern Ireland, she said, right, just come to Scotland instead, and we'll provide that for you. Again, interesting insight into the EU. Sometimes you feel with the EU, the Eastern European nations are becoming more influential, and they tend to be basically right about a lot of these things. Not uniformly, but generally they tend to be a counterweight to the more liberal Western European nations. Which way is it heading overall? I mean, there's a battle going on, but in the big picture, I don't see progress in the big picture. I don't see the EU heading in the right direction with regard to these moral issues at all. I still see it's very much entrenched on the wrong side. Right. Labour are trying Labour are trying by stealth to take us back in or alignment policies. They're anti-democratic. Yeah, that's very interesting. They're trying to basically appeal to a section of the electorate that didn't want to leave the EU. Now, Labour realised after the EU referendum that Labour could not say we will rejoin the EU because a lot of their voters voted for Brexit. So Labour realised that was not going to be a winner. The Lib Dems are trying it, the SNP are trying it, but Labour realised this is not going to work for us. But they do want to appeal to people who want to be back in the EU. So what you do from a political strategy point of view, well, you propose some sort of moves in the direction of cozying up to the EU, re-engaging in various ways, reintegrating into their systems. Now, Labour will want to do that for political reasons, regardless of whether or not it makes any sense. Now, I don't fully understand this, but I've heard people say that like going back into the customs union without rejoining the EU is just totally counterproductive. I mean, you're entering the customs union, but you've got no say over it, and it just wouldn't be a positive thing. But I think for Labour, they just know it appeals to people. So a lot of people think, oh, moving close to the EU, that's what I want. I wanted to be in the EU. I didn't want to leave in the first place. That sounds good. I'll support Labour. And really, that's a very unfortunate way of thinking, because the way of thinking should actually be this change is being proposed. What would its practical consequences be? Would it help or would it hinder the United Kingdom? But I fear that that question is a secondary question beyond which section of the electorate will this appeal to. So I think we've, there could be trouble ahead in that regard. That's just explaining that policy. Right, not too long ago, this was an interesting one. This was from Japan. And the young lady here is at her wedding ceremony, and she is marrying an AI person, not a person, marrying her AI friend. She's overcome with emotion at this event, this expression of mutual love and commitment, but she's marrying an AI friend. I mean, what can you make of that? I suppose it's sad, really, that people would be thinking like that. And there's an article that was saying that, you know, her AI friend is basically much better than real people. Well, that's sad as well. The person in the background seems to be presiding at the ceremony in some way. I would say with this sort of thing, no one should go along with it. You know, if you're invited to a wedding ceremony, someone marrying the AI friend, you can't go. You can't take part in anything like that. So I think all the people there, they probably think that they're being compassionate and supportive. They know it's a bit weird and probably not a good thing, but you know that we don't upset her, do we? But really, no one is doing this girl any favors by going along with this. She needs to realize, and other people need to realize as well who are looking on, that this is really, really crazy. But what will happen with AI in the future? I mean, because you can have a conversation with AI. So will we be in a situation where people are a bit lonely and you have a chat with ChatGPT and it keeps you company a bit? Well, I would say, yeah, that's fine. I mean, the television keeps people company, doesn't it? I mean, I haven't had a television for ages and ages, but I remember when I lived on my own and had a television, if I had the TV on, when I turned it off, you suddenly feel a bit lonely. Like, oh, there's no one talking anymore. As you never have it on in the first place, you don't particularly feel that. So if someone, you know, quite enjoys the conversation with AI, then, you know, fine. But if anyone starts thinking it's a substitute for or the equivalent to a real relationship, then that's something that's gone very wrong. Same way people say, you know, the more I see of people, the more I like dogs. I think, no, there's something gone wrong there as well. when people are saying that. But if you're saying you like dogs more than people, that's like saying you like things that you can't really relate to on an even level. It's not a genuine relationship in the way of a relationship between people. So yeah, that was a sad story from Japan. We'll leave that one. We'll leave that one for this week. I said I'd include lots of statistics, didn't I? Let's get on to these. Right, how about this one? Spending on special educational needs, basically, in schools. And that's a projection of the spending as it's going to increase in the future. These are England and Wales figures. It will be similar in Scotland. But basically, the point of this is not sustainable. That more and more people, I mean, there's some classes in Scotland, and many classes where more than half of the pupils have got some special educational need diagnosed with them. I think it's something like 40% of pupils in Scottish schools are regarded as having a special need, therefore needing special support. And the cost of this special support is just unsustainable. So we've got a problem here. It's not helping the pupils who receive the diagnosis, because it creates sometimes a passive mentality. And instead of parents saying, right, remember your books, get a system, get up a bit earlier in the morning, get a checklist, put them in your bag, and don't forget them. Instead of being like that, parents are more likely to think the school's not supporting them properly. And the teacher keeps telling him off for not bringing his books. That's so insensitive. That's what his special learning profile says he's disorganized. So school, you're failing him. That's really not helpful change. So the diagnosis had an entirely negative effect. But the problem for politicians is there's now so many parents who have a child diagnosed with some sort of learning difficulty that's a substantial section of the electorate. And it's a brave party that's going to challenge this whole culture. But needless to say, we're happy to do it. Help with language. Yep, some of it is that. Yep. I think the discussion about Glasgow and the number of pupils for whom English is a second language, a lot of the discussion about that has been dire. That's a very valid issue to bring up. Now, the fact that someone's second language is English doesn't necessarily mean that their English isn't very good. Their English might be very good, but it's going to tend to indicate that overall. So the fact that a very large number of pupils in primary schools, their level of English is not what you'd expect of a native speaker of that age, is that a problem for the educational system? Well, it obviously is. But the discussion has tended, the response to that issue has tended to be, that's racist. Why are you picking on these? Being able to, John Swinney said, being able to speak two languages is a good thing. Well, it is. It is a good thing. But being in school trying to learn in a language that you're not very good at isn't a good thing. I mean, it's so obvious, isn't it? I mean, anyone can see the blatant truth, but the ideology comes first. And John Swinney, etc., will not concede that this is actually a valid concern. Now, some of the people raising that concern, maybe they are raising it from a bit of an unpleasant attitude, bit of a hostile attitude, but whatever. But that doesn't affect the fact that it's a perfectly valid point to make. But how about this then? Scotland's deficit, including share of North Sea oil. So this is the percentage that, if you compare what Scotland earns income to expenditure, so the percentage that the expenditure exceeds the income by, so per year. So we've got the UK in red, Scotland in blue. So you can see the UK's deficit about 5%, just under 5%, Scotland's over 10%. So very dramatic difference. So Scotland is overspending and living beyond its means even more than the UK in general, which is a very serious concern because it ends in tears. You can't just keep piling up debt and mounting interest payments, and it all just looks after itself in the end, and there's no problem. I mean, if anyone ran their household finances the way the Scottish government runs and the UK government run the national finances, you'd think that house was absolutely incompetent and they're heading for disaster. But that just makes it clear what's going on in Scotland. But still in the Parliament and in the media, the talk is about who needs more money spending, And Swinney's answered lots of, we've spent an extra 100 million, we've spent an extra this much, we've spent an extra this much. And then the other parties in the media criticize them on that same basis. But the other side of, where's the money going to come from? We need to cut down. We need to grow the economy. That really doesn't come into it. Right, that's just the deficit again compared to other countries. So Scotland, the worst on that whole range of countries. So some countries are operating at a surplus. Denmark, Cyprus, Ireland, Sweden. They see the UK in red, pretty bad. Scotland in blue, well, terrible situation. Right, tax rates. Marginal tax rate. Now, marginal tax rate means how much tax you'd pay on the next pound you'd earn, if you like. So Scotland in red, UK in blue. Now, you'll hear John Swinney say taxes aren't higher in Scotland. Most people in Scotland pay less tax than they do in England and Wales. Now, I'm not going to argue with that as a fact, but it's a very misleading fact. Look at that graph there. Where is it that the red line, the Scotland line, is actually lower than the blue line? Can you see that? It's a tiny little square. You see the first vertical line going up at about, 12,500 or something, the tax allowance. Then you'll see the red one goes along a little bit and up, and the blue one goes up a little bit and along. That tiny little square there is the bit where taxes are lower in Scotland. And if you look at the rest of the graph, taxes are higher at basically more or less every point from then on. Now, if you look at that tiny little rectangle at the beginning where Scottish taxes are lower, how many people are in that? Well, a lot of people. Well, basically everyone who's paying tax. That affects everyone. And the other ones are for higher earners. So, sure, John Swinney is right that more than half of taxpayers benefit overall by that tiny little difference. But the benefit is minuscule. It's a very small increase. Whereas the difference is higher up, where you have to pay more in Scotland, they will be very large sums. The graph makes it nice and clear. Adult disability payment forecast. How about that? Bear in mind that the Scottish budget is, I think, under 100 billion. Not too long ago, it was 40 billion, but I'm way out of date. I think it's much higher than that. But adult disability payments going up to 4.5 billion. Now, complicated issue here. A lot of people need adult disability payments. Okay, well, there's no dispute about that. It is a necessary benefit, but it's just rocketing. It's rocketing, and it's heading towards being unsustainable. So many things. When you look at the national scene, UK and Scotland, it's not sustainable. And governments need to be planning in the long term to sort that out. A&E waiting times, that was interesting. Percentage of patients seen within 4 hours. I mean, really, if you're going to A&E, you'd hope to be seen a lot sooner than 4 hours. Surely, I mean, 4 hours, it seems terrible to me. But look now, I mean, the percentage meeting that target, we're down in the 60s. So that is pretty poor A&E service. I mean, my experience with the NHS basically is almost entirely positive. When I've been to A&E, it's been good. I don't know. Maybe I go at the quiet time, but I have no idea. I don't know. But this is what counts, the statistics, and that is very poor performance. In the weeks to come, we'll talk about what to do about that, because that's going to be a hot election issue. Right, we're at 10 o'clock. Let's just do drugs-related deaths. I'll touch this and then save it for next week. Drugs-related deaths in Scotland. We hear an awful lot about that, don't we? Worst in Europe, worst in the UK, terrible problem, blight on Scotland, all sorts of policies being proposed by the government, media campaigns, etc. Drugs-related deaths per year, just over 1,000. Alcohol-specific deaths in Scotland, 1,276. So significantly more people killed by alcohol than drugs. But notice the difference here. This is alcohol-specific. So this is not related. So not where drugs was one factor. This is ones where alcohol is the factor. Alcohol-specific deaths in Scotland, which indicates that the damage done by alcohol is actually far greater than the damage done by illegal drugs. So why is it that the government and media attention is almost exclusively on the drugs? Well, we can talk about that next week. I think my theory is that the government's very reluctant to address the issue, because to address it, you need to address a culture, an alcohol culture in Scotland that's unhealthy, and the governments don't want to do that because they don't want to be seen as puritanical or killjoys or the Taunton Taliban or whatever. So they don't want to approach that issue at all because they don't want to upset people. Therefore, that number of deaths carries on with virtually no attention at all. It is a disgrace. It is. I think the drug deaths that's a terrible, terrible statistic. I think the alcohol ones equally are quite appalling. Right. So next week we should be back to our usual Tuesday slot, and keep your eye on our social media. Sign up for our newsletter if you don't get that already, and I hope to see you at some of our meetings around the country as we're introducing our election campaign plans. So, right. Thanks for watching, live and later, and see you next week. Good night.